Hello and welcome to Timing is Everything, a program of Care Dimensions, formerly Hospice of the North Shore in Greater Boston. Today we have the good fortune of having Lisa Krinsky, who's the director of the LGBT Aging Project, back with us. She actually was with us a short time ago, and there was so much information that we wanted to have her back to have further discussion. Lisa, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me back.
So tell the audience a bit again about yourself and about the LGBT Aging Project.
Sure. So I've been the director of the LGBT Aging Project for almost 13 years. We're a program of FenwayHealth in Boston, and the work that we do is around cultural competency and training for elder service providers so they can be welcoming for LGBT folks, and also doing some community programs for LGBT older adults themselves, and finally doing some policy and advocacy work that underpins it all.
Wow, that's a lot of work. Tell us, so we're using the acronym LGBT. Can you go into, again, for those that are watching, what that actually means?
Sure. So we're talking about lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender older adults. And when we people identify as lesbian, gay, or bisexual, we're talking about their sexual orientation, who they're attracted to, who they partner with. When we're talking about people who are transgender, we're talking about really individuals themselves, their internal sense of what their gender is, and then how they represent that in the world outside of themselves.
Excellent.
So two separate factors.
They are, and people sometimes don't get the concept of that.
Right.
So that's why, again, this is such an important topic, because it's a topic that doesn't often get talked about, and it's so important. Talk a little bit about some of the numbers in terms of, because again, I know sometimes it's hard to identify how many people belong to these groups of individuals.
Absolutely, and one of the reasons it's difficult to have that kind of data is because we don't have the vehicles for collecting it. So if you think about the paperwork of life, where they ask you all sorts of demographic questions about yourself, including how much money you have and all of that, we're not usually asking people their sexual orientation or their gender identity, although we're beginning to see that happening more and more in a lot of healthcare facilities. What we do know is that nationally we probably have between 1.4 and 8 million LGBT older adults, and expect that number to double in the next 20 years or so. So as I like to say, it's sort of like going from the size of Rhode Island, populous, to the size of Massachusetts.
Yeah, which is a great way of looking at it. Again, visually, you can really, or conceptually, you can get a better idea of this.
Right.
See, because again, I don't think people understand really the magnitude.
Right. And I think we also have some issues about how visible individuals have been. So when we talk about older adults, sometimes people slice that at 50 plus, which is myself and my mother, both in the same generation. So thinking about what generation, so the oldest old folks who are in their 80s, were really a very invisible generation of LGBT folks. They didn't tell anybody at all. The next generation, folks who are in their 70s or so, we think of that as sort of our greatest generation, and the generation that might have kept a secret, but then we're clearly identifying themselves in some trusted environments of themselves. And then we have sort of that younger kind of baby boomer generation who have been out for a very long time, and they plan to continue to do so as they grow older.
Wow, that's great. Now, so talk a bit, if you would, about what are some of the unique issues for LGBT older adults as opposed to the general population.
So there are a couple takeaways. One is that in some ways a lot of the issues are exactly the same. Conditions of people's health, what their housing is like, do they have enough money to support themselves, what do they do that's meaningful in their lives, who's their support network. Those are things that everybody is facing as they're growing older, and that applies for LGBT folks. But for this population of folks, we're also seeing sort of an additional layer that impacts that, which depends on what their life experience has been like as an LGBT person coming to this stage of their life. And so what we will find is that for some folks, the kinds of support networks that we consider to be in place for older adults, which would be a spouse or partner, adult children, grandchildren, might be the community that you've lived in and your neighbors that you've been embedded with, your faith community, your local community, that LGBT folks may not be able to turn to those networks in the same way that other folks do. And so we know that most LGBT older adults are aging alone without a spouse or partner. Many do not have adult children, may be relying on their friends. When we talk about family of choice, those are the people who we select to be part of our lives and treat as family members, not just the biological family. And actually what's interesting is that when we talk about caregiving, this is where we see a real difference for LGBT folks, because in the general population, most of the caregivers are women, and they are providing 90% of that care to somebody they're related to through marriage or birth. What we see in the LGBT community is quite different, and what we see is that there's an even number of men and women who act as caregivers, and that about 60% of that care is given to the folks within their sort of biological family. But what that means is that there's probably about 40% of that care that's going to family of choice, that's going to people who on the forms may check off other, but these are the friends that have been part of their lives for years. And what we see in our community is that we have much more horizontal caregiving than we do vertical. So the vertical is the traditional model, the older adult, her adult child, the grandchildren down below that. What we see in the LGBT community, much more horizontal. So you're my friend, and therefore you're going to help me out when I need something. You're going to help someone else when you need help. We'll help you. But we know that when people are relatively at similar stages of life, that if you have a broken hip, you can't go out and pick up my prescription. I can't do for you in the same way that we see in an intergenerational context. So that's
really a huge loss with that intergenerational, isn't there?
Right.
More than people even realize. I think people take this for granted, this intergenerational piece and how critical it is.
Yeah. It's one of the reasons why we're also trying to develop more intergenerational activities and programs in the LGBT community. Also because we know that this is a generation, the older adults, who have an important history to share with us and really want to be able to be role models and to help younger folks understand sort of what it took for the world to get to the place that it is today. And so we try to do programs and activities that allow them to share that, so they have a sense of sort of what are your gay grandparents telling you about sort of the cultural history that they don't have in other contexts.
You know what I'm finding too is that, again, for the younger population of LGBT individuals, again, not necessarily understanding kind of the, like you talked about, some of what the older groups have gone through. And I think, maybe you could just share a little bit of some of those issues too.
So, it was interesting. I was at a memorial service yesterday for one of our community members who had passed on, and they were talking about, in the 1960s, they would go to gay bars. There was no sign outside. You would get in. It was downstairs. And that the windows were covered, and that there was somebody who sat at the door, and when the police came, they flicked the lights, and suddenly same-sex couples would swap off, and would suddenly be, two men would move along and repair with two women, and so they looked like a heterosexual couple dancing. But that's what people had to do in order to go out and socialize. And so I think it's important that, younger people in their 20s, people in their teens and younger understand that that's what life was like not really that long ago. And to sort of understand how much the world has changed.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think they understand the stigmatization and really how criminalized really, and all of that. So there's really, when we look at some of the health issues or the plight that people go through, it's really quite significant.
Right, and we see health disparities for our population as well, that there are reasons why there's additional stressors, and that there may be increased anxiety and depression for some folks. They may not be getting the kind of medical care on a regular basis. We're fortunate to be part of FenwayHealth, which is an extremely large health center that provides LGBT competent care, and it's definitely a resource for folks who feel like they want to be seen and heard and understood.
Yeah, but I think you bring up an important point, though, because again, we assume that when people have health needs that they automatically seek health care, but that's different. It's really a different thing here.
Absolutely, or that they may go and seek the care, but they may not be telling the full story.
Right.
And may not know whether or not their provider is welcoming. It's one of the reasons why we at the Aging Project like to do cultural competency training with elder care providers, so that when people have to deal with elder services, it may be about programs coming into their home, it could be about hospice care, it could be about a variety of resources that people will know, oh, they've been through a training. They've heard about this before. We want to be able to reassure people that they will be treated with dignity and respect when they are receiving care, which is usually at a pretty vulnerable point in their life.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's one less thing to worry about.
Sure. And I think, and you hear a lot of times, again, that even people who maybe, had come out, or that they, that you know, they were able to do that, that sometimes when they're feeling more vulnerable in their later years or with declining health, sometimes that turns around.
Right, and sometimes people may feel like they have to go back in the closet in order to access health care or long-term care. There's a story of a woman in Illinois who lost her partner, went into assisted living, and was incredibly harassed, both by the staff and the other residents. And fortunately, there's some national organizations who are now picking up her lawsuit and challenging that, so that she doesn't have to live out her years feeling like she's being isolated and disrespected. None of us wants to live that way.
Sure.
And most of us probably don't want someone else to live that way as well.
Yeah, yeah, but I hear fear. I mean, you know, it must be so fearful for an individual, again, to have to be in that setting when you're feeling most vulnerable, not feeling well, and then trying to get the care that you deserve.
Right, absolutely.
You talk about culturally competent care too. You know, do you feel like, again, we're on the move with that? Things are getting better?
I think so. I think more and more places are thinking about, for example, many of them are now including asking questions about sexual orientation, gender identity, and explaining why they're asking. Also, that this helps us serve you better if we know more about you. If we know more about who's in your life, how you've lived your life, what's important to you. I think that makes every caregiver a better caregiver if they really get to know their patients.
Oh, that's good. Thank goodness. Talk about other health issues too, like Alzheimer's.
Well, you know, one of the things about Alzheimer's that's interesting as we sort of think about sort of our normal model or the way we think about Alzheimer's. So think about sort of who usually makes the diagnosis. I don't mean the official medical diagnosis, but usually it's adult children. Who say, gosh, Mom, that's the 4th time you've asked me that question today. Or, you know, why was your wallet found in the refrigerator? Those are the kinds of things that clue people on. So for our population that's A, living alone, B, less likely to have adult children, that first encounter, that beginning to see whether something's a problem, may not be the wallet in the refrigerator, it may be burning down the kitchen.
Right. Wow.
So we get concerned about folks who are aging alone, not having that kind of support. And then beyond that, then thinking about, so who becomes the primary caregiver for someone as they're less capable to do that for themselves? The model, again, that we think about, we turn to a spouse, we turn to adult children. In our cases, for our folks, maybe that's not who's there for them. So are they looking at other professional people to step in, care managers to do that? And to the extent then in the horizontal caregiving, when do friends step in to take that role and say, I will be the healthcare proxy, I will be the person who goes to the appointments, pays attention to what's happening for this person. And then thinking about, are you really legally empowered to do that? Sometimes what we've seen is that someone will develop dementia and the healthcare world is sort of looking to their next of kin, which legally may be a relative halfway across the country who barely knows this person, as opposed to the people who are part of their life and know them here. And how do they get to navigate that so that somebody really gets to age and live out their life in the ways that's most consistent with who they are.
So that's pretty complicated though, because again, when you're thinking about that, like you say, things can go unnoticed. And then it's hard depending on the frequency of the contact with friends and other things. So that really makes the situation much more complicated.
And we've seen for folks around with Alzheimer's and dementias, particularly what happens around that memory loss and their ability to filter or keep secrets. Because for many people, they have spent quite a bit of time filtering how they engage with other folks. This is what I would say to my friends. This is what I would say to people I don't know as well. When you don't have that filter, there's a real fear that people will be outing themselves, outing their caregivers and their loved ones. And how will that be treated in a different context? For transgender folks, there's some concern that if they lose more recent memory and revert to older memory, if there's a transgender woman who born male, transitioned to female, lived her life as female, is she then transitioning back? Is she sort of pulling to, no, my name is Jack, not Joan? And what happens as they're sort of entering that stage of life and knowing that their identity and who they are is honored. So.
You know, just bringing that up too, because, you know, you can see the distinct differences, because again, you know, often, again, you're hearing LGBT, but yet each initial has its own distinct, unique needs. Can you just speak a little bit more to that?
Sure. I mean, I think around older lesbians, I think we're seeing issues around health, access to health care, whatever health disparities they may be evidencing as women. in this world, I think particularly for gay men, gay and bisexual men, the whole impact of HIV and AIDS and the fact that they have lost so much of their peer group.
Yeah.
As of now, 1/2 of all of the people with HIV and AIDS in this country are over the age of 50.
Wow.
It's not a young person's disease anymore.
Wow.
Thinking about what's happening for those folks as they are aging and they are getting older. Around bisexuality, I think that's the most invisible letter in our alphabet soup. And I think that, again, people are dealing with stigma and negativity that they experience in the heterosexual world and that they also are experiencing in the LGBT world, where there can also be judgment about, you know, oh, just come out already. Don't do that bisexual thing. Just tell us you're gay.
Right, right.
And so that can be stressful for folks. And then again, as we're talking about the transgender issues, that, you know, whether people have transitioned earlier in life or whether they actually choose to do so at a later stage where they feel like, I must really honor the core of who I am and do this, and maybe they wait till they retire, maybe a death of a parent, something that allows them then to fulfill that, that need and desire for themselves.
Wow. It's complicated. Can you talk about the resources?
Sure. So there are numbers of different kinds of resources depending on what people are looking for. Again, in terms of sort of providers educating themselves, the LGBT Aging Project is we are a great resource for folks, so they can certainly reach out to us, and my contact information will be up later for how folks can find us. You can just Google us at LGBT Aging Project.
Good.
At FenwayHealth, and so that's a real resource. I think we've also seen a really great growth of some community groups for LGBT older adults. There are some lifelong learning groups that exist. There's some social clubs, one for older gay and bisexual men, a couple of them for older lesbian and bi women and trans women as well. So those are resources where people can kind of engage with their peer group. We also have a really wonderful group called Flashback Sunday for LGBT elders of color. And that has really been a wonderful opportunity to help create a space where people can be old, they can be LGBT, and they can be, in this case, most of them are African American. Okay. But they can bring that identity and all three of those elements in one place. So they do sort of really wonderful activities together. Massachusetts is also really fortunate to have an amazing network of LGBT-friendly cafes. So these are, in most cases, held once a month. And they are hosted by an elder service organization in the community. In the North Shore area here, North Shore Elder Services is the host for the Over the Rainbow Supper Club. And you can contact them for direct information about registering. But it's a great way for people to come together to share a meal, whether they're really needing it for the nutritional reason that it's there for them, or also for the social piece as well. But a number of those across the state that give people a chance to connect with one another.
The social piece seems as critical, right?
Absolutely.
I think, you know, we get so focused on the nutritional component that we minimize, and you just got done saying about the nature of isolation.
Right.
And when you're talking about that horizontal versus vertical kinds of caregiving, so I think isolation is something that is often overlooked here. So go ahead.
It's also, just as we think about the resources, it's also why we offer some resources to folks who are LGBT caregivers. So if you are an LGBT person caring for a parent, a spouse, partner, or friend, reach out to us and we can help connect you with some caregiver support. The other thing that we've also been able to offer are LGBT bereavement groups. So often that experience, as you talk about the isolation and the challenge of caring for and then losing a loved one, so thinking about, can we create opportunities just for LGBT folks to talk freely about what those relationships have been like for them.
Absolutely. So in terms of those resources, because again, a lot of people are going to have trouble in terms of how do I reach them? Because I think there's more out there than people even know.
Yes.
So how do they go about locating the services?
A couple of ways. One is they can just start with us, the LGBT Aging Project, and we're both on Facebook and we have a website through FenwayHealth, and that's a great place to start, and they can reach out to us. And we can help direct people to the meal sites, the other resources that are in the community.
That's good. And then, so you're a good resource in that way, so you can get people connected up in that way. Okay.
Absolutely.
So we're going to show that graphic now. It has your information and how to reach you, which is really important. So, because again, I think people are at a loss for this. It's that even some people, they're scared, they want to get out there, they want to socialize, they don't even know where to start.
Right. And so if you call us, we can just have a chat with you, talk a little bit about what may be available in your community and different options that folks can have. Even if they don't want to go now, they just want to learn a little bit more about what can happen next. We're always happy to talk with folks and help encourage them to make those connections.
Excellent. So talk about North Shore Pride.
Well, as you know, the month of June is Pride Month, and Boston Pride just celebrated in the first week of June, and there was an obviously very, very large, this year's felt like sort of the biggest crowd ever.
Did they have a sense of how many people went?
I never got the actual numbers, but just what we do is we have the Senior Pride Coalition, so these are all LGBT groups for older adults. We have 2 trolleys, and we march. And there's lots of energy and excitement, but it's a big, crazy crowd in Boston. So I think the thing that I like about the North Shore Pride is that it's smaller and it's a little more comfortable and not so overwhelming. So if you're someone who doesn't like really big crowds, North Shore Pride is definitely an antidote to that. So it's a lovely, warm community time. People will be marching, families will be out, and North Shore Pride is on Saturday, June 24th. It's on the Salem Common.
So
I think.
this coming Saturday.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
And then also what the folks up in the North Shore are doing is on Sunday the 25th, they are hosting their first Senior Pride Tea Dance. So there will be an actual activity for LGBT older adults during the course of the week.
That's great.
And people can reach out to the North Shore Pride committee and get more details about how to access that.
Excellent. And we're showing a graphic right now on the North Shore Pride and how they can get in touch with them in order to partake in some of these activities.
And it's really important to have older adults come out and show up and be present and show their face and have a fun program to go to. So you all are getting a tea dance on Sunday. So
that's wonderful.
That should be lots of fun.
That's great. And again, I don't think people are aware of all these activities. Right. So this is wonderful. Right. So we still have some time. I want you to talk more about, again, some of these other issues that come up for LGBT older adults, and other resources, other things that you can think of that are going to be helpful here.
So some of the things that are sort of on the horizon, a big topic that people are talking about is housing.
Okay.
Housing, just as they're getting older, are they going to age in place? And are there supports for them to do that? And if they think about moving, where would they move to?
Yep.
Many people, and across the country, we're seeing more and more attention to LGBT-friendly senior housing.
Yeah.
So a place that is particularly focused on being welcoming for LGBT folks. Yeah. It's not a segregated silo where no one else can go. Yeah. But it's an idea that this is going to be a space that really is going to have intention. Of being friendly for LGBT folks and their allies. I think that's one of the things that's so important and that we're seeing is that there are lots of LGBT folks who also have heterosexual and cisgender folks who are part of their personal network, and they want to be able to maintain those connections as well. So just as those meal sites are LGBT friendly and welcoming, the idea of developing some housing. So there's some efforts in the greater Boston area
that's wonderful.
To try and get that underway. It's definitely happening across the country, and we're seeing more and more versions of LGBT-friendly housing. So we're hoping that we'll have something similar to that here in Massachusetts in the coming years.
Well, and again, you talked about the baby boomers. So again, I mean, there's a huge need now. Because what are the alternatives right now? Because again, more and more people are needing skilled nursing, assisted living, all of that. Right. And I think it's critical, again, that people feel safe.
Absolutely.
And comfortable.
Absolutely. And both creating, I think my sense is that we can do this on a number of different levels. So it's great to create LGBT-friendly housing that would sort of be a standalone. Yeah. But my guess is maybe 100 people get to live there. It's not going to reach the majority numerically.
Sure.
And so we also want to make sure that other places where folks are living, if it's assisted living programs, skilled nursing, as you said, independent communities, we want to make sure that we're creating capacity, that those folks have training and skill set, and that people who want to stay at home can access the kinds of services to bring into their home that will help them to feel comfortable.
Do you see an increase in terms of the number of different, like again, whether it be an elder service agency or assisted living, skilled nursing, that have you come in to do cultural competency training?
Yes, I think that there are more places, and a long time ago, when I started doing this work 10, 15 years ago, I would go in and say, how many of you you know, have ever heard of LGBT aging? And like 2 people would raise their hands.
Right.
And now I go in, and there are really many more people who have been thinking about it, talking about it, had encounters with LGBT seniors. And so I think more and more places are thinking about how do we integrate this into our overall thoughts about diversity and inclusion. That's something that's important also because so many of the direct care workers are women. Women of color, perhaps from different cultural backgrounds or where LGBT identities and issues are not approved of and not seen in a positive and embraced way. So trying to navigate some of those issues so that those folks understand what it means here, and that our folks are also understanding that sometimes if a worker is going to say sort of, I'm going to pray for you, that we understand that comes with good intention. If they're really taking out a Bible and praying with you, that's probably not within the purview of what we want them to be doing when they're providing care. But that we can acknowledge sort of what happens at the intersection of our cultures. Because most people who are care providers are dedicated and have huge hearts and want to be helpful. And I think we want to make sure that that's happening in as successful a way as possible.
Absolutely. You know, and you often hear sometimes, you know, and I've heard this over and over about, you know, well, you know, I want to treat everybody the same. So that treat everybody the same mentality. So talk about that if you will for a few minutes.
Treat everyone the same is really a lovely concept. And, you know, when we think about it in terms of I want to treat somebody with respect. I want to do what is in their best interest. But what I think of as respectful may not be what you think of as respectful. And so we're sort of putting everybody the same as I am going to reach out and treat everybody I encounter the same, but that may not tailor it to who those people are and what they do. And so it's a little bit of understanding how will that person experience being respected? And what can I do that's consistent with that? Not necessarily covering you with what I think is respectful.
It really, you're exactly right. It just doesn't take into consideration the unique needs of each person, you know, and those differences. So, and like you say, I think it's well intended, but in the long run, it doesn't quite do what the hope is, which is to identify and to make it person or patient-centered care, you know, or staying away from patient, even just person-centered care, in terms of making sure that each person's or individual's unique needs are addressed.
So I know of an occasion where there was a woman who was a direct care worker working with a gay man, and when his partner came to visit, she was there. She was a little taken aback, and then she said, "Oh, he's lovely. You're lovely. You're both. I'm going to keep your secret." Well, for them, it wasn't a secret. But she came from a culture where that identity could be life-threatening. So her keeping his secret was a gesture of compassion. From his perspective, he felt like, I don't have a secret. You don't have to keep this a secret. I'm not carrying a sense of shame about it. And so again, well-meaning, but sort of at 2 different places. And so trying to understand what can happen in an incident like that. But what she was doing was a compassionate thing.
What an excellent example. I mean, my God. And again, some people don't even think of these things in terms of that magnitude. Wow, that's it. Well, you know, we're kind of coming to the end here. It's been so great having you on the show.
My
I'll
pleasure.
tell you, it's just never enough time because there's so much to talk about. Again, we're going to put up your contact information, Lisa. Maybe you could even just say it out loud for us, how we can reach you.
Absolutely. So if you want to reach me, probably 2 ways to do that. By phone is 617-927-6229. And by email, which is with me always, which is lkrinsky, LKRINSKY, at FenwayHealth.org.
Great. Thanks again for being on the show.
My pleasure.
And I want to thank everybody for tuning in today, and we look forward to you joining us for the next show.
That I've experienced with Care Dimensions.
Because it's about the patient's quality of life.
We provide care during one of the most challenging times in a family's life.
One of the things that we really focus on is how people want to live their life.
We have transformed the way our community experiences end-of-life care. It is more than hospice. It is care for advanced illness.
At Care Dimensions, we'll take care of your family like you're a part of ours.